Okay. So we're unpacking in this first book of the Torah, the book of Genesis. We're unpacking, the Torah unpacks the early generations, foundations of the Jewish people. Up until now, we've read about, to the extent we have scriptural data about the lives of Abraham and Sarah, our first patriarch and matriarch. That came to an end this last week. Yesterday, in synagogues around the world, we read about both the passing of Sarah and the passing of Abraham. Sarah and Abraham had a single child, Yitzchak, Isaac, and we've spoken quite a bit about him too. Abraham had a child, had some other children, and one child who we spoke more extensively about than just naming him was someone named Yishmael, who was the forerunner of the Arab nation, and we have spoken about him also prior. Now, in this week's Torah portion, we start to formulate the life of Isaac, and yesterday we read that he married a woman named Rebecca. So now we're on to phase 2, the second link in this chain of the creation of the Jewish people. So the launch of the Torah portion is, these are the chronicles or the generations of Isaac. Now, and it gets into Isaac and Rivka and their children, but just looking at the launch, the Torah says these are the generations. So you look at 93 in text 1a. The way the Torah portion begins is that these are the generations of Isaac. Now we know who Isaac is already. Oops. Thank you. Time to share screen. Text 1a. These are the generations of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Now we already know who he is. We've spoken about him in the past a couple of Torah portions, but they identify him as the son of Abraham, and then doubles and it says Abraham begat Isaac, which is on the face of it useless information. First of all, aside from the fact that we know who his father is from before, you didn't even have to mention son of Abraham. But once you did, we get it. If he's son of Abraham, that means Abraham begat Isaac. Now, in a Torah that is so concise and cheap on ink, you have to try to figure out, like, what's the Torah trying to tell us. So, if you look in text 2, I'm sorry, text 1b, it is the morning. We have books here and chairs over there. There we go.
Good
well done. It's like the air hockey.
You don't know your thing.
So it says Rashi, the primary commentary in the Torah, he latches on to this idea of Abraham. Abraham begot. We said that Isaac is the son of Abraham, which again we know who he is already. But even once you said that already, why does the Torah want to now double down and say Abraham begot Isaac? So Rashi gives us an insight. In one of the things, before we get into the text, one of the things that we've read in the rather sparse biographical data we have about Abraham and Sarah, we have a little episode we spoke about in the Torah in prior weeks, where they were traveling, Abraham and Sarah traveling, and they go through a country, and the king of the ruler of that area named Avimelech. You remember, you're talking about thousands of years ago, ancient world, and immorality doesn't measure up with the way we think. And he says, she's pretty, I'll take her, about Sarah. And he takes her into his home, but God afflicts him with certain ailments, skin ailments, and so on. So he doesn't touch her. And then there, God comes to him in a dream, and he says, everything is good. She goes back to Abraham. He doesn't end up touching her. But the fact is, the world knows that she was abducted. So Rashi says, so here's what was going on in the subtext. Sarah was barren for all those years. She couldn't have children. Abraham Sarah guides Abraham to try and marry another woman so that he can have children. Her name is Hagar, and he's successful. So the world knows he's had a child from Hagar, and he's a pretty public person because he's a little crazy. He's monotheistic, and he's a counterculturalist. And they know that she is unable to have children. But now, all of a sudden, she gets pregnant. Say, whose is this? And they say, this is an Avimelech thing. It wasn't somehow the chemistry wasn't working between you and Abraham, but this is an Avimelech child. People on local TMZ of the time, they found this to gossip about. So if you look into this, what Rashi says, since Scripture wrote Isaac the son of Abraham, it had to say, why did it have to say Abraham begot Isaac? Because the scorners of the generation were saying that Sarah had conceived from Avimelech, or she had lived with Abraham for many years and not conceived from him. So they're saying, how do we know? So what is the Torah saying? Abraham begot Isaac. The Torah is attesting to it. But it's not only the Torah attesting to it, because who said these people care about what the Torah is saying? And the Torah comes about much later. The Torah is saying that God manipulated nature at that time so that it was clear that this was Abraham's son. God, and from the language of the Talmud, it's not so clear in Rashi, God reconfigured the face of Isaac to say, to make him look, it's not so miraculous for a child to look like a parent, but apparently Isaac didn't really look like him too much. But what did the Holy One, blessed be he, do? He shaped the features of Isaac's face to resemble Abraham's, even though they didn't look naturally didn't look like each other. And everyone attested that Abraham had begotten Isaac. This is the meaning of what is written here, Isaac the son of Abraham, because here is proof that Abraham begot Isaac. So just on the plain communal level, very simple, shallow story here. Abraham and Sarah have a child, Isaac. We know about that. Now we're going to tell you about Isaac's life, Isaac and Rebecca. The Torah tells us who Isaac's father is, even though it's not necessary information because we know this already. And then says, and by the way, in case you missed it, Abraham is the father of Isaac. Why? Because there was this speculation that maybe this isn't the seed of Abraham, and God made a miracle so that it was very clear that they because of the way they look, that they appear the same. When the Torah talks about things in the physical sense, there's always a more spiritual key. Certainly, if the Torah brings us so few details about the stories of our patriarchs and matriarchs. When they're throwing something in, they're trying to teach us something, not just about what happened at the time, because there's no real lesson from there, except the fact that there were always gossips. So here, the commentaries, mysticism, Hasidic thought, look at Abraham and Isaac and what they represent. Before we get into that, we speak about, in understanding spirituality, we speak about energies in the universe, energies within God, energies present in the universe, energies within ourselves, in our souls. And they break down into, we talk about using Kabbalistic language, 10 sephirot, which are 10 energies, building blocks of the universe, of the reality, or of the soul. But two primary rhythms in the world, which play out in the sephirot, is what we call chesed, which means it's simplistically translated as kindness, and gevura, which is more a discipline. Now, what does that mean? Let's move away from Abraham and Isaac for a minute. The Talmud tells us that when the Jews crossed over the split sea, when the Jews left Egypt, and the Egyptians were chasing them, and they came to the sea, and we all know from the Passover story, the sea split, and they went in, they were able to cross, and then when the Egyptians followed them, the waters came crashing down. There's language of the Talmud that was a difficult thing for God. What's so difficult? First of all, is anything difficult for God? You created a world that was okay, and what was the whole deal with the crossing of the sea? What's so special about it? And one of the things we're told is that there was a very strong place to say, look at those Jews. The Jews were spiritually, they were, as we're told by our rabbis, they were just an inch away from being lost forever. They'd been beaten, they'd been deprived of their heritage, deprived of opportunities to study. They knew very little, only very shallow things about their patriarchs and matriarchs and their heritage. So the Talmud tells us, angels, let's say, why are they worth saving? There's a point. And they say the Egyptians aren't good. They're not that great either. That's what the Talmud tells us. So in looking at the world, there's one way to say, they say, these are the Jews, they're Abraham and Sarah's descendants, they're people who God has chosen. There's a reason to give to them. But there's a reason to say, you're not so deserving. And that, we're told, is what the Talmud means is difficult. Because there are two legitimate values that they're talking about within God, but within us, there's the part of us that wants to give. And we're all individuals. Some of us are givers, some of us are not so instinctively such givers. But for a person, if we take a child, where there's more of an instinct to say, I want to do right by my child, and I want to give, then there's a part that says, maybe not. Maybe it's not good for them. Maybe I've given too much. There's the point of restraint. So chesed, what I called chesed before, chesed is kindness, it's love, it's friendship, it's connection. It's a hug. It's a chesed. Gevura, the other one is, on the one hand, it's respect, it's restraint, it's boundaries. Maybe hugging here is not the proper thing to do. Not that we don't like each other, but maybe it's restraining oneself, even if there's positive feelings, restraining oneself and properly channeling it. And in that Gevura sense, it's really having expectations and wondering if this is the right thing for the other person.
Is this incident
Which one?
about the conception of Isaac?
Yeah.
Part of the reason that descent as Jewish is through the matrilineal line?
It's not the reason, but it fits into that. That if you want to know, it's much easier to know who a child's mother is.
Definitely.
Yes. Practical reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So here, there is this idea of what we're going to call here in text 2, the Kabbalah of personalities. Abraham and Isaac had two very different personalities from birth. So before we get into Abraham and Isaac, let's look into analyze two different types of personalities. There are two approaches when it comes to serving God. One is the approach of the left side, which is associated with restraint and obstruction. And obstruction is not a good word to translate, I don't think. Restraint means restraint and withholding sometimes. If I walk into a class, or if you walk into an area, any areas of expertise, and you just let loose to people who are lay people in your field, and just with all your knowledge, you're not going to get anywhere. That's not the way a good teacher works. You have to filter the information and recognize who the recipient is. You don't just speak off the shoot from the lip of what exactly what's going on in your head. Think about who's listening. Try to fashion it in a way that it's hearable and understandable. So one of the things, even when it comes to serving God, is to measure what we're giving to someone else, and measure our times also. And this is a time for study. This is a time for work. This is a time for tzedakah or whatever else we're doing. This approach fuels a type of service that is limited and constrained, which it's not a knock. It's organized, such as giving charity only according to one's means and not splurging more than a set amount of one's income. That's Torah. Torah says don't give more than 20% of your income to charity. It's not responsible. That's not a knock on a person who looks and says, I got this much. This is what I can give to charity. Similarly, such a person is measured with a Torah study, dedicating only the amount of time necessary to discharge their obligation, namely the fixed times explicitly prescribed in the Torah. Torah gives us a lot of stuff to do. So you've got to watch the clock. It's time for the morning service or it's time for the afternoon service. You've got, I can eat this, but not that. And after this, I make this blessing before and that blessing after. There's a program. Everybody's got a program. No matter what you do, there's a program. There should be a program. It's an organized life. But then there's another approach to life. By contrast, an approach from the right side, we're going to call this what we call the chesed, the kindness, the love, the giving, is associated with generosity and an uninhibited expansiveness. The person is just bubbling over. Doesn't mean that person doesn't recognize that there's a time and that there are certain limits and boundaries. But they don't live in the world of boundaries. They live in the world of giving. And then sometimes they have to take a look at the boundaries. Those people usually color over the lines a little bit in giving. Maybe they're a little bit too friendly. Maybe they give a little bit too much charity. They give out themselves too much, and maybe it's they're wearing themselves down. But they're on the giving side. That's who they are. There's no withholding or inhibition to this person's generosity of spirit, whether it is in matters of charity or Torah study. They aren't satisfied with simply discharging their obligation, but rather carrying on with no restraint. So here you have maybe extremes, but two general personality types. One is the Abraham, one of the earliest Kabbalistic books, Sefer HaBahir. It quotes that God created kindness in the world, and that force of kindness said, in other words, as though he could speak, said, as long as Abraham was alive in the world, I had nothing to do. This guy was a conduit for kindness to everyone. Abraham was a lover. Abraham was a connector. Abraham was a giver. And to the extent that this is what the Kabbalistic book says, God's attribute of kindness. I'm on vacation. Abraham is the conduit for the divine idea of kindness. That embodies Abraham. And that's the way he's described, a giver. Isaac, now Abraham, even when it came to his son Ishmael, and that's an important thing also here, Sarah, once Sarah had Isaac, and Sarah had encouraged him to marry this other woman, Hagar, and encouraged her to have another child. So this was all part of Sarah's plan. When she saw how he was growing up, she said to Abraham, this kid is a murderer, he's a thief, he's an adulterer, it's not good for the house. And the scripture says Abraham wasn't happy with that. Hey, he's my kid. What am I supposed to do with him? And then it says that God spoke to Abraham, and we read this actually on Rosh Hashanah. Said, whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her. That's the language of the Torah. In other words, and Rashi brings it there, that Sarah, God was telling Abraham, Sarah has deeper insight into what's going on in your house than you do. You are a giver. You just want to, you can't imagine somehow restricting that love and doing the tough love thing. And therefore, you're allowing this kid. It's not a good thing. And partially because of your loving, sometimes too much love is always a good thing, but too much of that generosity of allowing things to be is not a good thing. Sometimes you have to call it what it is. So Abraham is actually seen, and they don't have any of the quotes here. That's in the Talmud. It says Abraham was great and a giver and a generosity, but he also spawned a Yishmael, not an accident. So here, Isaac, the next generation, perhaps because of his, certainly because of his own soul type, and perhaps because of what he observed in his house, he's in the other direction. He's very measured. Sure, he's a loving husband and dad, but he's described in much more introspective, much more measured terms. And so those are Abraham and Isaac are two different poles. One is the giving, and one is deeply good, but more on the respect, awe, introspective, thoughtful type. So here, if you look in text 3a, from one of the Hasidic greats, actually Malki's ancestor, says, these are the generations of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Isaac is a prototype of discipline, whereas Abraham is a prototype of generosity, as is well known. It's a reason we have in this week's Torah portion, further on, it doesn't tell us much about Isaac at all. But it tells us a few times he's digging wells. Now, digging wells in the ancient world was an important thing because you had to have water. But if you're just taking that biographical data, he comes from great people, Abraham and Sarah, and he was really good with a spade. There's not much you see about him. What are you really digging wells? So the mystics tell us that digging wells is what happens with a well. You're digging through dirt. It just looks like plain dirt, and digging to find the gold of water. Isaac was digging within himself and helping others dig within themselves. He was focused differently, not just out there glad-handing and giving, which is all beautiful. He was much more measured and focused with depth to be able to uncover the richness of life, of the soul. And in 3b, the second Chabad Rebbe expounds on this. He says the verse states, his left, it's a verse in the Song of Songs, which is more of a romantic book of scripture, which describes the love story between us and God. His left hand was under my head, and his right hand would embrace me. His left hand was under my head as a reference to Isaac, who was a vehicle for the supernal elements of discipline that are associated with the left side. Abraham was a vehicle for the supernal element of generosity, which is associated with the right, alluded to in the verse, and his right hand would embrace me. So we could see that Abraham and Isaac are two poles. So the flow in looking at Abraham and seeing how he got to Isaac, it's not so clear. Now, Yishmael, we're told, was a warped but very clear extension of Abraham. He was a giver where he shouldn't be. He was hugging and more where he shouldn't be. He was making himself at home in other people's homes. It was a warped, this flow of outward to others ended up being perverted into a negative way. And here, if you look in text 4, Ishmael was the archetype of an unholy generosity, possessing an insatiable spirit of expansiveness. As the verse states about him, his hand is in everything, and everything is in his hand. That's what the Torah tells us. What do you mean, everything? His hand is in. What does that mean, even? His hand is in everything, everything is his hand. It means he's touching what doesn't belong to him, whether it's a person or a thing. So Abraham is going to be able to give people things. And if he has something in his pocket, he wants to be able to have other people to benefit. He's generous. Yishmael has that person A is connecting with person B, but instead of giving, he's taking. That's just a minor difference. So it's seen to people watching. I say, yeah, well, he's a chip off the old block. He just chipped in the wrong direction because you can see their personality was very similar. And as Onkelos was the earliest, the Aramaic translation translates, his hand is in everything as he needs everything. In other words, he's also very needy. The opposite of one who is content with what they have, which is the Torah ideal. So now, in a way, you can understand now why does the Torah open up this week's Torah portion with these are the chronicles of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. Because with people looking on the side, not only looking at their face, looking at personalities, you can see where Yishmael comes from Abraham. Certainly he didn't grow up the way his dad wanted him to, but you see the personality and how it went, of course. What's that?
Look.
I didn't go yet. This is number 4, right? Yeah, I'm not reading it yet.
Okay.
But you can see that. But if they look at Isaac, they say, not only he doesn't look like him, but that's not the big deal. He's just so not him. Where does he come from? He comes from the Abraham and Sarah, who are out there. They're activists. They are bringing people in. Both of them, Abraham and Sarah, are very active. Abraham with the men, Sarah with the women. They're touching people. They're bringing people into their tent. And here, this kid, like, where does he come from? In soul type, not only in looks. So the Torah has to open up and says, these are the chronicles of Isaac, and notwithstanding what you're going to understand about him, or who he was as a person, internally and looks, he is a direct extension of Abraham. Now they bring in text 5, a Kabbalistic piece here, which tells us that these are everything in our souls, our makeup is all a reflection of divine energies. And in this piece of the Zohar, which is the primary textbook of Kabbalah, the prophet Elijah of blessed memory opened and said, "Eternal hidden master of the worlds, you are he whose unity is infinite and absolute, and therefore indivisible. You are the first cause, transcendent beyond all that is above, and concealed behind all that is concealed. No thought whatsoever can grasp you." This is all stuff we can sit and talk about plenty. It's very profound stuff, but not for today. This is the part that's more relevant. You have brought forth 10 rectifications. I don't think that's a great translation. It means 10 attributes, 10 expressions, which we call the 10 Sephirot, with which to regulate the powerful illumination of your light that flows down through hidden worlds that are not revealed, as well as worlds that are revealed. Indeed, it is through these that you are hidden from human beings, so they can exist and not be overwhelmed by your light. You are he who binds them and unifies them. So here you see here that God brings forth energy. It's a powerful illumination, a giving light, revealed, but it has to be hidden from human beings so they can exist and not be overwhelmed by your light. Like a teacher. A teacher can't come in. If I'm a novice, which I would be in physics, And I sit in the class of Albert Einstein, and he knows that there are people like me, novices. He can't come in and speak to people like a group from the Academy of Sciences. He's got to filter what he's saying, because you're going to overwhelm me. I'm going to get nothing out of it. That's in the human master-student model. With God, there's the giving. In the Hebrew, again, it's the chesed, the Abraham of the light, but it has to also be concealed. We all have that within us. We have both of them within us. But some of us are naturally more connectors and givers. Some of us are more naturally more defined, where we know exactly where all our marbles and the paper clips are, and we know how they are. And again, they're both good. But the question is who we are and what we can do with our personality. And along that line, text 6. From the second Chabad Rebbe, which is actually, this is an explanation of that piece of the Zohar. Some scholars, this doesn't only apply to scholars. He happens to be talking here about before we get into it, just explain it. There are two very famous personages in the 1st century who led the Jewish people. One was named Hillel. That's where they get the Hillel houses, are named after him. And Shammai, who's less known, but they were both absolutely equally powerful figures leading the Jewish people. They were very different. Hillel, like Abraham, was a giver. He just wanted to be able to give to people. Shammai, brilliant. Shammai had expectations. He was a good man. He wasn't a curmudgeon. He had expectations. So the classic story, and there are a number of them, is that this, and you've probably heard of here or elsewhere before. The Talmud tells us about a prospective convert who comes to Shammai and says, I want to convert, and I want you to teach me the entire Torah while I'm standing on one foot. And Shammai chases him out of his house. Why? Is he a nasty person? No. He's saying, go back and think about what you're asking. You're being disrespectful. How can you, if you really want to study Torah and get a grip on this profound way of life, don't be disrespectful and think that I'm going to be able to give it to you in 5 seconds. Go rethink it. He's hoping he'll come back. He's saying, come on, I'm not going to play with your mishagas. So he leaves. He goes to Hillel. What does Hillel do? Hillel says, pick up your foot. What is hateful to you, don't do to others. That is the entire Torah. The rest is all commentary. Now go study. So Hillel says, I'll meet you where you are. But I'm going to tell you that this is only a very short, this is not, it's the entire Torah in the sense that it's in a capsule, but you really need to go study. So he's trying to inspire him to go study. Hillel, you walk away from that. Hillel's the guy you want to have a beer with. Shammai, not so fast. But Shammai wasn't a bad guy. Shammai just had expectations and said, don't mock my religion and don't come in with that attitude. Come in like respect. I want to take care of you. Then we can have a beer, but come in with respect. Different types of personalities, different souls. We talk about there's different soul types, not just attitudes. And he's here. The reason he brings up some scholars is because he's talking about them. It obviously applies. We all have different souls rooted in different ways.
They both failed.
I think they both succeeded.
No, I think they both failed because I thought when the convert comes to Rabbi's job is to convert out of it first.
Good point. But let's assume he's already been through that. Okay, just for the sake of them, we can deal with it. They knew Torah better than me and you. So if you got to figure that if that was a hoop that they needed to jump through at that time, they did that part. But the gist of the story is that one tolerated the somewhat disrespectful mishagas, and one said, "No, I expect more of you," and get yourself into shape and then come back. So what does it say? Some scholars possess a soul rooted in the supernal attribute of chesed, which we translated again simplistically as kindness, whereas other souls are rooted in gevura, which we translate more simplistically as discipline, because it's really a whole spectrum along the kindness continuum, or the whole spectrum across the respect or discipline in a discipline spectrum. That is why there are conflicting opinions. Some ruling in a generous manner to render something pure or kosher. It is an account of each, and some being very strict. It is an account of each sage's soul source that these sages view God's ways in a generous way. For example, Hillel would regularly issue lenient rulings. He was able to see how God's presence was able to manifest if affairs were conducted in a certain kosher way. But Shammai was stricter, due to the root of his soul in Gvura. That swayed his thought process to issue stricter rulings to render things impure or kosher. And I wouldn't put it understood, I say he perceived that for such things, it was impossible for God to be manifest in that way. I don't like the translation too much. The point was, Hillel would look at a situation, he'd look at a person, say, here's who you are, here's your background, here's the details, and we're trying to bring God into the world. I think we can do this. You can do this mitzvah this way, which is, it's easier for you to get it done. And therefore we can look and say it's an appropriate way to do it, even if it's not the optimal way I would do it. You do the mitzvah, and we bring godliness to the world. Shammai was someone who had higher expectations. Said, "No, do it right. I'm not dealing with the B team here. Do it. You want to do a mitzvah? Do a mitzvah." The halacha follows Hillel, but the Shammai idea is always seeing in a person. I can't go over time today, but seeing in a person or a situation potential, and not just surrendering to it, the reality. Like we're coming up on Hanukkah. There's a famous debate in the Talmud, and we know you have to light Hanukkah lights. But when the rabbis instituted Hanukkah lights, they just instituted lighting a light. The idea, and we do 8 lights, but the idea of doing it in ascending order, the later rabbis instituted. And there's a debate in the Talmud between Hillel and Shammai. How are we supposed to do this? Hillel says, first night 1, second night 2, third night 3. That's what we do. Shammai says, no, first night 8, second night 7, third night 6. And each one of them brings some scriptural reference to try and support it. The Rebbe once said, that fits perfectly into their attitudes. Hillel celebrated what we have here. You want to you can do a mitzvah this way? Mazel tov. Tomorrow, do better. Right now, we're going to do our mitzvah. So each day was, we're going to light a light. You can do a second night. Like a second night. Shammai looked at the potential. We got 8 days of Hanukkah. Light 8 lights. You see, he wants the potential actualized now. The second day, there's only 7 days left. Less potential, so less actualization. So it's like when you look at a person, you look at a student, you look at a loved one, say, you can do better. So we have to measure. How much do we press and demand that potential doing better actualizes today? And how much do we celebrate the less than potential accomplishment today, and try to use that to encourage that you do better tomorrow? There are different ways. And again, it's to say one is right, one is wrong. They're both okay, but we have to balance them, because if you go overboard in trying to demand potential, you can lose your client, because sometimes you give up because I'm not there. And if you just relax saying, "Why you did this? Wow, you didn't rob a bank today and get an award." You want to be able to, even in celebrating the present, if you overdo it and not nudging them to do better, what you're doing is you're facilitating inertia. So there's a balance. And here says actually the next one, all the sages of the Talmudic era would render a halachic decision based on how they understood the source of all Torah as it is on high, and how it would manifest in this physical world. So now that we've established that Abraham and Isaac were two different personality types, and that manifested itself in the face, now we're understanding why the Torah was hammering home this idea that yes, Isaac comes from Abraham. It's not just about that we wonder whether Avimelech fooled around with Sarah. It's that there is a spiritual connection. And let's get into that a little bit. Text 7. First of all, let's go on the more superficial. The face. Jewish spirituality tells us that a person's face is connected with the character of the soul. A generous and kind person displays a kind face, whereas a stern and reserved person has a sharper look. You don't want to judge a book by its cover, and you don't want to judge by by a face. But sometimes there's a certain energy people are exuding, which either are I'm friendly or stay away. It comes across. When I was in Poland now, looking at faces, frankly, I was thinking Nazis. It was there. I don't. I'm not because maybe just because of why I was there, but generally, it's not about a face specifically and how a person looks, but there's something to a demeanor. Don't go home and tell. Don't go home and tell anyone that I knocked Poland. Okay. When people those who met the Rabbi would tell me that they looking at his face, his eyes. Sometimes there's just between us. You walk into a room. There's some people who seem more open for a hello, how's it going, and some people just mind your own business. Like what's it to you? So a person, I think I read this on a person's face is connected with the character of the soul. A generous and kind person displays a kind face, whereas a stern and reserved person has a sharper look. Along those lines, we find in the book of Ecclesiastes a verse that says, "Who is the wise person who knows the meaning of a thing? A person's wisdom makes their face shine, and the boldness of the face is changed." There is this language in the scripture, and we use it in Jewish spirituality, that wisdom, it shows. You can look at someone and you kind of know they have substance to them. Now you might be wrong because you're misreading it, but it shows that substance or a relative shallowness. Now that's on the face end, because we say you're a human being, so your spirituality, your personality is internal, but it's not just internal. It often shows itself. So now, when we're looking at the Abraham and Isaac relationship, first of all, the Torah is telling us don't mistake. I'm sorry. Okay. Don't mistake Isaac's personality for being unkind. Sometimes in order to be kind, you need to restrict yourself. If I feel like I go home today and say, I'm overwhelmed with what's going on in Israel. I want to give every nickel that I have, and max out my credit cards to be able to give to Magen David Adom. It's a nice thing, except that maybe it's not being so nice to my family. It's not the idea of restraint, the idea of not being just in the giving. That's not a not nice thing. It's a tool towards niceness. And therefore, the idea of Isaac, like I said before about Hillel and Shammai, a person could say, Hillel's the guy I want to hang out with, and Shammai, just stay away. Look, you just chased the guy out of his house. Shammai was a nice person. But Shammai, he had standards, he had expectations, but it was on his way of doing nice. If he wanted to help me, years ago, just checking the time, I many years ago, I showed, when we were in the old house, I showed a video of the Rebbe, who it was a clip that someone put together of a bunch of different clips of the Rebbe encouraging people to be able to do more to meet their potential. That was the Rebbe's thing. The Rebbe was loving and kind and embracing, but he always would say, "You did this, great. What's going to be tomorrow?" And my father's chairman of the board at the college, who was passed away already, David Chase, but he had a relationship with the Rebbe, and he wasn't an observant guy, but he knew the drill. So he would come to the Rebbe and say, I did this, Rebbe, but I know you're going to ask me what's the next step. So because that was the Rebbe's deal. And I find it very empowering. So remember, we showed the video, and there was someone, a good friend, who's still a good friend, and the look on his face, I saw something didn't click. So after we finished the video, I walked over to him and said, "What'd you think of that?" He goes, "No, didn't like it." I said, "Why?" He said, "It reminded me of my mother. Never good enough." He said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Whoa." Oh, I'm not showing that anymore. I said, that's so not the Rebbe. He didn't know. He's taking it out. I said, "I did this. You're talking about tomorrow? I did this already. Just leave me alone." So there is, one could think, that if one is asking for looking at someone's potential, I find it very empowering, but it has to be presented in a loving way, exactly the way that Rebbe did it. If it's decontextualized from that, it could seem very judgmental. I got an A. Why you hassling me about an A plus? Those are the complaints I get sometimes. So it's here, Isaac's, what we're going to say, his more reserved and a constricted approach to life was all about giving, but giving in a proper way and in an empowering way. So now we're going to go to text 9, and here's something that the Rebbe added to all this. He said, if God wants to make, before we go to text 9, the Rebbe asked a simple question. He said, if God wants to make a miracle, and he's reconfiguring Isaac's face to mirror Abraham's face, maybe he could have reconfigured Abraham's face to look like Isaac's face. Why is Abraham the gold standard? So let's take a look at text 9. The message for all of us is clear. There are certain situations when either approach is valid, either with generosity or restraint. But when in doubt as to which one to choose, and the Rebbe said, in this generation, always choose generosity. And that was something that the Rebbe told some of the older Russian teachers. He said, whatever they used to do in the shtetl, God bless them. He says, in this generation, err on the side of kindness and generosity and acceptance and tolerance. And that's what he's saying here. Abraham is the gold standard. God fashioned Isaac, the model of restraint, to look like Abraham, not Abraham, the model of giving, to look like Isaac. And if you look here in text 10, what we have from the Talmud, Hillel said, and Hillel we know was a giver. He says, "Be a student of Aaron, Moses' brother Aaron." Who was he? He was personified by loving peace, pursuing peace, love all creatures, and through that bring them closer to the Torah. In other words, it's not don't go lecture as much as care, be a friend, inspire, and don't to go and just tell someone you're doing something wrong. You're not going to get anywhere, and it's not the way to go. It's come and say, here's a way we can do this better, and inspire through love.
So
yeah,
the spiritual message about Isaac is son of Abraham, Abraham begot Isaac.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to, if we can,
sure. Let's bring it all together. Summarize.
I don't know. I'm saying, is it that we have both these attributes, but generosity should be the lead?
I'd say we all have these attributes, and we all need both attributes. You have a complex toolbox. We don't have to be simply in one lane or in the other. But yes, what you're saying is the drive. Even first of all, even the drive of our restraint and our discipline should be one of being able to express love and connection. If I discipline my children, it's not because I'm trying to hurt them. I'm trying to give them something. I'm trying to give them a lesson. It's a painful one. I wish it wasn't, but I get no pleasure in the restraint part. It's a necessary tool. The drive, I have to make sure of myself. No elderly parent disciplines a child because they want to get revenge on a child. You want to teach them because you want the best for your child. You want them to be functional, healthy adults. So that's the drive. Now, if what he's saying here is, and if in my mind, they both seem legitimate and I really can't see one outweighing the other, they're on the side of generosity. That's what.
So that's the spiritual.
That's correct.
Okay.
Psycho-spiritual. Text 11. Hillel speaks of those who are distant from God and from following his ways. That in the prior text from the Talmud, which is why they merit the derogatory title of simple creatures. It says love creatures. People, creatures are, it's bringing them down a notch. Yet we must pull them with thick ropes of love. Perhaps, just maybe, we can succeed in bringing them closer to God and following his ways. Regardless, we won't lose, as we'll fulfill the mitzvah of loving another Jew. Someone asked me yesterday, it said, doesn't it come to a point where someone does something despicable that you start, if they're doing that despicable, we despise them. I said, if someone's doing something despicable, we despise the actions, and that spills over to the person, but you're never off the hook with also loving them. You have to care about them as a human being. And even, as I was telling you yesterday, even when it comes to the rare times that there's capital punishment in Judaism, in how capital punishment is addressed, the rabbis turn to the verse of love your fellow as you love yourself to help guide how we kill the guy. Because you want to do it as painless as possible. Because no one ever, no matter what they do, they never remove themselves from being God's creature. And that demands a modicum of respect. We have siblings. We have family members. God forbid, one of them should do something really despicable. We'd find it abhorrent, all that, but they're still family. I assume that Charles Manson's mother always thought that, Charlie was a good kid. He just, he hung out with the wrong crowd. Or something, because how do you ever give up on a child? Or give up? There's always that basic relation. Let's do key points. And if it's okay with you, I'm sorry. Today, I mentioned before, I think today is the International Convention of Rabbis, so of Chabad rabbis, and so afterwards, have to leave here a little later. 103. Though they were father and son, Abraham and Isaac didn't naturally look alike. It took a miracle to change that. Number 2, Kabbalah speaks of several cognitive and emotional attributes. In the latter, the primary two traits are called chesed and gvura, generosity and restraint. Number 3, Abraham and Isaac were two archetypes of these two traits. Abraham, the paragon of generosity, Isaac, the paragon of restraint. Number 4, neither trait is good in its extreme, rather they should be tempered with one another. Next one, that said, each person is encouraged to work with and within the personality type they possess. These traits are coded in each person's soul. The soul traits stem from a mirror image on high in God himself. For example, the human tendency for generosity is due to a soul rooted in God's tendency for kindness. These tendencies impact how a person thinks and even how they look. Thus, Abraham and Isaac naturally did not look alike due to their divergent souls. It took a miracle to change that. God changed Isaac's very disposition. And finally, the reason why God changed Isaac to appear like his father and not the other way around is because when faced with either option, it's best to always choose the side of chesed. So,
Okay,
if it's okay with you, I'm gonna leave this here because we can put on tefillin here. In this room, we'll do it. It's gonna be easy pass.
okay.
Okay. For a good week, everybody. See you next week.
See you
Apologize
next
for that.
week, Rabbi.